Hello, viewer. This is a brief summary of the manhwa called How a Boy Ended Up in a School with an Evil Teacher. Enjoy listening and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. On the outskirts of a quiet Japanese town stood a school shrouded in an aura of mystery. Its tall walls, entwined with ivy, seemed to hide secrets of the past, while the old lanterns lining the path to the entrance radiated a warm glow, hinting at something enigmatic. Rumor had it that one of the classrooms housed a teacher whose strictness defied human limits. His name was Saito Sensei, and it was said that he could incinerate anyone who dared to disobey with just a glance. Yuki, a 13-year-old boy with a dreamy heart and sparkling eyes, had recently moved to this town with his family. His father had taken a job at the local university, and his mother busied herself with the garden surrounding their new home. Like any teenager, Yuki was both anxious and excited about the changes. He had always loved learning new things and eagerly awaited his first day at his new school. In his imagination, school was a place where he would make friends, delve into a world of knowledge, and perhaps uncover some fascinating mysteries. However, he had no idea that his expectations would collide with a reality full of challenges. The morning of his first school day began brightly. Soft rays of sunlight streamed into his room, a gentle breeze stirred the curtains, and Yuki, nervously donning his crisp new school uniform, envisioned how the day would unfold. His backpack was neatly packed with textbooks in colorful covers, a brand new pencil case, and even a small charm his mother had attached to the zipper for good luck. He stepped out of the house, brimming with enthusiasm. The rustle of wind through the trees and the whisper of autumn leaves accompanied his steps. Crossing an old bridge over the river, Yuki saw his new school building for the first time. Tall, with classic Japanese architectural elements, it appeared both majestic and slightly intimidating. When Yuki entered the classroom, his heart fluttered. The spacious room, with its large windows and pristine boards, looked welcoming, but the atmosphere inside was tense. His classmates sat upright, barely speaking, their eyes fixed on their desks. The air felt heavy, as if it carried an invisible weight. This struck Yuki as odd, but he attributed it to first-day nerves. Choosing a seat by the window, he unpacked his belongings and waited for the lesson to begin. Suddenly, the door burst open with such force that even the calmest students flinched at the sound. Standing in the doorway was a tall man in a long dark coat that billowed like a raven's wings with his movements. His face was sharp and sternly defined, and his eyes were cold, like winter nights. The students instantly froze. The man stepped inside, and each of his steps echoed heavily in the silence. "My name is Saito Sensei," he declared in a deep, steady voice that sounded like an order. "In my class, I demand discipline and perfection in your work. Anyone who disrupts will find their way out through that door. Understood?" The students nodded in unison, but Yuki felt his heartbeat quicken. So that's why the atmosphere is like this, he thought. The first lesson began, and Saito Sensei prowled between the rows like a predator observing its prey. His steps were silent but imposing. The only sound in the room was the scratch of pencils on paper. Yuki tried to focus, but his hand accidentally knocked his pencil off the desk, and it fell to the floor with a loud clatter. The class froze. Saito Sensei's eyes immediately locked onto the boy. "Who did that?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Yuki raised his hand, feeling his cheeks flush with embarrassment. "I'm sorry, it was me," he said quietly. The teacher approached him slowly, his gaze heavy and intimidating. The silence in the room was almost tangible. "If you cannot control your actions," he said coldly, "how do you expect to control knowledge? Do not let it happen again." Yuki nodded, biting his lip. That day turned into a real trial for him. After class, He sat on a bench in the schoolyard, pondering what to do next. A senior girl with long black hair named Aoi approached him. Her presence seemed light and airy, as if she were part of the surrounding world. She sat down beside him and spoke in a soft, encouraging voice. "You're new, aren't you? Don't worry, everyone goes through this. Saito-sensei, he's strict, but he's not mean. He just has a hard time." "A hard time?" Yuki asked, surprised. "Why?" "Exercising is great for balance," Yuki told her. Aoi paused, gazing into the distance as if searching for the right words. "Hey, they say he wasn't always like this. Cheerful, inspiring. But one day, he lost something important. Since then, he's become withdrawn. But, I think he still wants his students to be the best. He just has a different way of showing it." These words struck a chord with Yuki. He decided he wouldn't give up. That night, he spent hours poring over his textbooks, preparing for the next day. He wanted not only to study, but also to understand Saito-sensei and uncover the mystery behind his stern demeanor. The next day, Yuki arrived at the classroom early. When Saito-sensei entered, the boy stood up and, gathering all his courage, said, "Saito-sensei, I want to become your best student. Please tell me what I need to do to achieve that." The teacher froze, squinting at him in surprise. For a few seconds, the classroom was completely silent. Then the corner of his mouth twitched slightly, as though he was suppressing a faint smile. "Amran." Taking the boy by the shoulders, Yuki said, "Okay, I can do this." "Very well, Yuki. If you want to prove your worth, show it through action. Tomorrow there will be a test. Impress me." "Excellent," said Yuki. "I'm willing to prove my worth too." Yuki nodded, feeling a surge of determination. He spent the entire evening preparing, and by morning he felt confident. The test was incredibly challenging, but the boy poured everything he knew into it. The next day, as Saito-sensei handed back the graded tests, he stopped in front of Yuki and placed the paper on his desk with a mark of excellent. Looking at the boy, he quietly said, "Well done. Perhaps there is something worthwhile in you. Keep it up." That moment became a turning point for Yuki. He realized that beneath Saito-sensei's harshness lay someone who simply wanted his students to strive for greatness. The teacher began to notice his students' achievements more often, and the class started to see him not just as a strict instructor, but as someone capable of being fair and perhaps even kind. For his part, Yuki learned not to fear difficulties and to move forward no matter what. Several weeks had passed since Yuki received praise from Saito-sensei. Attending the new school was becoming a routine for him. He had made friends with Aoi and a few other classmates who admired his perseverance and determination. Nevertheless, Saito-sensei remained an enigmatic figure. Though the teacher occasionally encouraged his students, his gaze was still cold, and his voice stern. Yuki felt that there was something more hidden behind that icy facade. One day after class, Aoi suggested that Yuki stay at school a bit longer. "There's a place I want to show you," she said mysteriously, a sly smile on her face. "Oh?" Yuki, already accustomed to her cryptic suggestions, agreed. They headed toward the older part of the school, a place students usually avoided. The walls here were cracked, and the floorboards creaked with every step. "Why doesn't anyone come here?" Yuki asked, glancing around. "They say this part of the school is abandoned." "But I've heard that Saito-sensei comes here often after class," Aoi replied, pushing open the door to a dark corridor. They moved cautiously until they reached an old room with a cracked wooden door. Aoi carefully turned the handle, and the door creaked open. Inside, the room was dim, but strange symbols drawn in chalk flickered faintly on one of the walls. "Are those runes?" Yuki whispered. Aoi nodded. "I read about them in the library. They're protection symbols, like an ancient barrier." Maybe Saito-sensei uses this place for something important. They explored the room until Owl found an old notebook. Its pages were yellowed, but the handwriting inside was crisp and legible. Have you kept it? Is there names? Aoi said in surprise. Yuki leaned over her shoulder and saw a long list. Each page had dates and names, and next to some were strange marks resembling symbols. It's like a record, he murmured. But why is it here? Exercise from the 19th century had been known to separate phones from dogs. Before he could finish his thought, they heard footsteps. Heavy and deliberate, they grew louder with each passing moment. Who's there? A familiar voice called. Yuki and Aoi froze, unsure of what to do. Moments later, the door swung open sharply, and there stood their teacher. His eyes burned with anger, but there was something else. Was it surprise? Disappointment? Japan could have its meddlings of people. You shouldn't be here, he said coldly. Return to class immediately. Yuki felt a surge of determination rise within him. He stepped forward. Saito-sensei, he began, we didn't mean to upset you, but why is this place abandoned? Why are these symbols here? The teacher let out a sharp breath, his gaze growing even colder. You're too curious, Yuki. This isn't for children. But Aoi also stepped forward. Crowley's eyes followed the designer. Sensei, we just want to understand. We can see that you want to protect us, but why are you hiding so much? Her words seemed to shake him. For a moment, a flicker of sorrow crossed his face. He sighed and clasped his hands behind his back. You really want to know? Fine. Then listen. But Saito-sensei closed the door and sat down at the dusty old desk. Yuki and Aoi remained standing, watching him intently. Many years ago, I was just like you, young, curious, eager to learn. I loved teaching and inspiring my students. But one day, I made a mistake. A poor girl from other places came to our school, and how strongly I regretted what I did. What kind of mistake? Yuki asked, unable to contain his curiosity. I wanted to help a student who was struggling with a severe illness. I found an ancient scroll that I believed could heal them, but instead I unleashed a force I couldn't control. These runes. Ao began to piece it together. They're protecting the school from that force, aren't they? Saito-sensei nodded. Yes, ever since, I've dedicated my life to containing what I released. That power could harm not just the school, but the entire town. I can't afford to make another mistake. That's why I'm strict. That's why I can't tolerate disorder. Yuki stood in silence, processing what he had heard. He no longer saw Saito-sensei as just a stern teacher, but as someone burdened with a heavy responsibility. We want to help you, Yuki said suddenly. Saito-sensei frowned. This isn't your fight, Yuki. But you always say that knowledge should be backed by action, Yuki countered. We can be useful. The teacher stared at him for a long time before slowly nodding. Very well, if you truly wish to help, then come here after class tomorrow. But know this, it will be dangerous.